No, but thanks for your presentations. We saw like 5 very different presentations, but of course, there are some connections. As your interest in history, we in some projects saw use of ruins as a kind of like metaphor or a tool to work and to tell the story. Work with a collective or individual memory or interest in place attachment of the people and the spatial situations there. So how does those things relate to your own practice in general, let's say, or to your research and to the project of each other?
I think you summed up a bit at the end. Like the word of empathy, I think was quite good to use. Like I also use it in my presentation, I believe, because like it's good sometimes to find new ways. And I think, I mean, it's a storytelling part somehow. And I really believe it's we use storytelling also for one thing. It's like to really enter to the thoughts and to mix, to be able to have a tool to mix feelings and more political or social and economical aspects. I don't know. This is a. I don't.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up the same thing. I think the word empathy is something I use a lot in teaching and writing and all sorts of things, because I think, A, there isn't enough of it in the world in general, empathy. A lot of people have sympathy but not empathy. But also in terms of architecture, and I think you touched on it with the balconies, it's useful and it plays a bit to what I was talking about and the other talks I saw, where the notion of architecture has to be about opening up possibilities and opportunities for people rather than creating a story for someone else to live. And that empathy is creating that space. It's allowing someone else to come into that conversation, which I think, you know, everyone in this room does, and it came up in the other talks this morning and will come up later. But I think outside of this room and some of the more perceived things of architecture, that needs to enter the conversation.
Basically, I mean, I have nothing different to say but my personal practice and my personal beliefs are what you saw in these slides and this presentation, and this is the truth that I live and that I keep living. Probably I have the luxury that I'm not a practicing architect, but I'm someone who early on realized that my work is really much more related to urban anthropology and also managing different conversation of this kind. But yeah, I believe that the thing is to opening, the issue is how to open up, how to embrace, because this, being an architect, it's really difficult to let go of who you are in terms of your authorship. But then, again, you should be at service to people, because this is all about the people and for the people, I guess.
I like the fact that you just said that you feel more related to maybe urban anthropology and not architecture. And I think that if you ask anyone here, they might say something else rather than saying that, I mean, they have to do, their research, let's say, has to do with architecture. And I think the problem is not actually architecture. I think what we all seen today, at least from our 5 presentations that had to do with narrative and storytelling, it's how we document real stories. And I like the fact that in all 5 presentations, the way of archiving stories was very different. And I think it is very important to understand that building up a narrative, although it's something, even if it's something imaginary, and that what I personally tried to do in my presentation, I mean, it has to do a lot with what happens in real life. Maybe that's the empathy that we're trying to say before.
So I don't know what to say, but what is resonating in my mind is the word ruin, and it's actually something that none of us used too much in our presentations. We didn't mention ruin as, kind of, I was trying to rewind. And it's like very how to say, no notion for the destroyed environments, war, post-war, or abandoned, and like what you show also, there is image of the ruin, but still I think it's changed. It's not in this notion of being fascinated by the ruins, activate them and stuff like that. I think we are all looking into something different. I would say I really like your work on this 1 million, because I was also in Kosovo many times, and I think it's super interesting that you are looking at these empty flats. And how I would think how you want to animate this, how to show that they are empty. It's not just shut down, but there is something else happening there. And also, in our practice, I always work with a lot of people, not usually alone, but somehow, because our practice looks how to transform narratives, not only how to document or how to archive or how to transform these narratives into some materials that can be used by everyone, because when you are on the field doing research and you say to the people, oh, I'm looking into post-human theory, and they are like, okay, I'm just, living here and I'm kind of survival of something, or I have some needs, so it's really difficult to put our practice into practice. I would say what we show today, and this is for me like a real challenge. Maybe your work is the closest to the human condition in this. Maybe I think it's very. There are no big theories there. You just put images and sentences. It's also a bit performative, but it's nice. But still, I'm like. So for me, that's kind of always an issue. Even if I'm teaching at university, students working on the field with different people, the same questions always remain. Like, okay, how do we practice what we teach? How do we practice what we research? And it's never good enough, I think, something like that. Yeah.
May I say something? No, congratulations. I see a little difference between the first 4 work and the 5th, because the first 4 cases, the story is complete. I mean, it's like artworks. They have their narrative, they have a way of telling it. In this case, you touch a point which can be a lot of discussion about, controversial. It's not only, in Italy, balcony glazing has been, but it happens in China, it's an interesting border between architectural culture and people culture. And of course, one of the problems with architectural platform future, it looks like everything started last year, but there was something before last year, and there was a lot of discussion on this. Parasite, self-constructing, self-help in the last 20, 30 years, that can be an interesting fuel for you to expand this research, because I think this is exactly where we've been fighting in the last 10, 20 years, how to install a virus into architecture culture that could incorporate, but it's a non-solved battle, it's a non-solved issue we discuss every day, we fight every day with our students, with our museums, whatever. So I think there's more like discussion where there's beautiful, narrative, I think, in the other works.
I just add something to that. I think sometimes the problem isn't inserting those ideas and methods into architecture, but architecture lobbying and inserting them into politics and economics and the world in which it has to exist, because a practice that employs 5 or 10 people suddenly is kind of enslaved to wider systems. And I think that goes way beyond architecture. That goes towards economics and community and all kinds of other things. But yeah, if we can get it in the students, then it can start to seep out a bit further.
Well, last week a friend of mine, who was the head of the Warner Bros. System in Italy, asked me how to glaze a balcony. in historic center.
I think, adding to what you said, people, I think you're right, it's not new, but I would disagree that I just think there's something new about that, because... Oh, thank you. No, I was saying that I agree that it's not a new debate, but what I see new in your approaches is the kind of audience you're approaching to. Because maybe in the past 30 years we were talking only in between architects. You're expanding. And for me, that's something really promising. And yes, just to point a bit about that, because there is, for instance, in your graphic soap opera, we can see the reality of how buildings are evolving and fading or blossoming. So it's just a note on your comment.
Hello, this is a question to Will, specifically. I come from Cyprus, and at the moment, the coast of Limassol is being radically transformed because of the Golden Passport scheme. So property developers are building high-rise luxury buildings, and the government is selling passports. That's one way of getting out of the financial crisis, according to them. And as a result, the whole coastline is pasted with computer-generated images showing potential buyers as well as locals what the ideal lifestyle is or looks like. And it's usually associated to these apartments that locals can't afford to buy. So it's purely for an investment. And I wanted to ask you in regards to what you were speaking about, this heap of broken computer-generated images. What's a responsible approach on behalf of architects and property developers in constructing imagery that is, in a way, generating a more sustainable future and expectations as well of what locals can look up to as a better future or as more responsible architecture?
Yeah, so we don't have a coastline in London, but we've got two coastlines along the Thames which sound very, very similar. And I think one of Boris Johnson's post-Brexit strategies will be to sell passports to the super rich, who will only then throw more money. Yeah, who will then throw only more money at the sort of towers which everyone in London can see, but no one can occupy or afford. I live in a part of London called Vauxhall, and or near Vauxhall, which is undergoing huge, rapid change at the moment. And there's one particular tower there I've studied, which is called the Donatella Versace Tower. I don't think she's ever been or intends to, but it's got her brand identity, especially on the interior design. And the hoardings that wrap around the building site are covering, have all this sort of imagery of the luxury opulence of the inside of those flats, and very carefully curated objects, plates and cushions, especially cushions and books, which speak to a kind of a global wealth, but with nothing too identifiable or interesting. And what I find interesting about those images, and it touches on what you're saying, I think, is that I understand those images when they're put in marketing brochures and sent off to Asia or the Middle East. Or I understand when they're on websites where people can kind of, scroll past them and choose what their next capital investment is. But I don't understand why they're plastered on the hoardings in one of the poorest parts of London, or anywhere, and probably the same in Cyprus, where I think they're actually quite an aggressive act of sort of disruption, because the only people that will see them at ground level are the people that are being forced out of that community, who will never be able to afford in that community. And so those images, which are presented as kind of glowing, benign images of, hope and capitalist glory, are actually kind of really aggressive strategies of deployment at ground level, going back to sort of urban military tactics of the past, but not physical, but psychological. And it's always interesting to compare images used in planning applications or marketing, and then to take a photograph, 2 years, 5 years after the building is built, and then see, hang on, so these trees never appeared. Where are the people playing frisbee and the hundreds of, very white people sitting down having picnics? It's never like it's displayed. And it's somewhere in that disjunct. People are slowly realizing it, in London certainly. But in terms of how you fight that as architects, I don't know, other than, that difficult conversation with any client to say no. But then architects, as I think we'll find in some of the talks later on, don't have that power always.
Thank you.
I have a question for diasporic ties. Yeah, so...
Kosandinos.
No, for
me?
diasporic ties, yeah. Sorry, I cannot pronounce your name. Yeah. So I am actually doing the same research, just in Bosnia, also diaspora architecture. And the thing I have been struggling with is it also connects to the narrative thing we have been talking about. So if you are making a narrative and doing this storytelling, especially if you're doing photography and you have, you know, this rows of photos of this like funny, nouveau-ish architecture, how other people perceive it, are we then just reinforcing the typical narrative of diaspora? Because especially, I mean everywhere, but especially on Balkans, it has a very specific undertone, mostly negative and derogatory, which also has to do with the history with Gastarbeiter, with war, obviously, and also even today with the whole brain drain. So, okay, this is maybe a combination of a question and a statement. So I think what's maybe a good approach is connecting, Sonia, is it? Yeah. So, you know, this little researches, like not little, but more personal, because I have actually focused more on houses and talking with people and, you know, making really photos of interiors and everything. But I have just been struggling with this. Should I, you know, make a photo documentation? I'm making it, but should I, you know, publish it? Should I? So your thoughts on that? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, of course it's ongoing and it will go further and so, but somehow it's a question I didn't even know before, you know, like that there was this like kind of negative perception of the diaspora before I went. And the thing is, somehow it was not a question for me. And the thing is that actually I'm looking is kind of the diversity of people that are in this diaspora. I mean, diaspora is a thing that somehow it just gathered people that they don't know each other. They have like each their own, of course, a life, and they didn't go away from Kosovo at the same time and at the same period, and so it's like very different narratives each time. And this is something that I would like actually to approach in the way to take like different characters. Like now I just presented one, like we have 10 minutes, and it's, of course, it's a very, I mean, it's one in between like thousands and so, and I would be really interested actually to get this complexity through different characters and so. And I don't know if I answered just the question. So. Maybe here.
I have a question for Sonia. I loved your presentation. And I was wondering if you have figured out a role for architects in which they can feel not defensive and disempowered by the empowerment of the occupant bricoleur that you show, because I really like this a lot. If I imagine we do an exhibition in the Swiss Architecture Museum, I can totally predict how all Swiss architects go in complete collective depression on the opening and say, what are we here for anymore? You know, if they say this is architecture now, what does it make of us? And it's interesting that architects mostly, I mean, in very design-conscious cultures, such as Switzerland or maybe also Japan, have a hard time to establish a relationship that is amicable with the occupant, in the sense of saying, well, we do not 100% of architecture, we do a part of it, right? And then at some moment we give over to the occupant, and we can feel happy about how she or he will continue this. But, you know, for instance, I would love to do a project about this. I really like this. And at the same time, I have to think about a way, how can I not entirely alienate my constituency somehow? Do you have an idea how we could do that?
Should we talk about it or not?
Okay. It's that delicate? Okay.